Hey everyone, Chris Laparty here with Dan Cortine, and welcome to another episode of A Father's Love Healing Through Heartache. Uh, like we said, we love to do our podcast to give dads the opportunity to talk about their loved ones and the grief that they're going through. And this episode is just like that. We want to give Christian the opportunity to come on and tell us about his daughter. So before we get to that, Dan, how you doing, buddy?
Doing okay. It's good to see you as always, buddy. And Christian, welcome. Thanks for
Same you
joining
as
us.
well.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Yeah, Christian. So, like I said, we like to just throw it right to you. We don't want to waste any time. We want you to tell your story. So, it's all you, brother. Go ahead.
Thank you, fellas. My name is Christian Paddock. I'm a dad of two beautiful daughters here in Seattle, Washington, and a husband to Megan, my partner. My daughter Hazel would have been 8 this March. She passed just almost 18 months ago. Hazel was born with a very rare genetic disorder called STX-BP1, which, when she was identified really just before her first birthday, she was one of only 300 people roughly that had been identified in the world. It's a absolutely random disorder. There was no causation or anything passed from one of us. It was just literally just a random disorder. The disorder largely causes things like seizures, seizure activity from very early age. Many of the children are nonverbal and non-mobile, depending upon the disorder can be either a deletion or an actual mutation within a particular line of their genetic code. We were not expecting anything unusual. She was our firstborn. There was no signs throughout Megan's pregnancy that there was anything untold or something to be concerned about. But on only day 2, the day after she was born, and she was beautiful, just a absolutely beautiful baby. But day 2 in the hospital, I had just gone home. We were only about 10 minutes from the hospital she was born in, and I ran home to check on the dog and grab a couple things we forgot, with the intention of being home that day. And as I just got home, Megan called and said, "Okay, don't freak out." But the baby turned blue and stopped breathing while they were here taking newborn photos. They would actually come in the room and take the photos in the room. So as I dashed back to the hospital, this sort of began this journey that we did not expect. We're certainly not prepared for. We spent roughly 10 days between 2 different NICUs between Seattle and, between the east side and Seattle. Day 4, they finally discovered the reason she would turn blue and she would turn sort of dusky. The color would basically drain from her face and she would stop breathing. And after the 3rd or 4th day, they hooked her up to a very rudimentary EEG, only a few lines. And what was later described to us is they said, "We have basic cable. We need to go get you high definition." And the doctor just literally happened to take a picture of her just very basic EEG and texted it to a friend of his who would turn out to be a world-class infant neurologist, and man, we would spend quite a few in the next 7 years with. And he immediately said that seizure activity, we need to transport her. We need to get her across town. And I'll tell you, that was the most stressful thing in my life at that time, was letting her be taken by ambulance across Seattle in 5 o'clock, Friday rush hour traffic. And it was very, very panic inducing. And then the level of care, we jumped up from a NICU that was very much like a hotel, very much a bed, a shower, your own private space. And then we moved into a NICU that had drastically different levels of not just care, but precautions and protocols. And so they hooked up to 24, 26 gold plated leads to determine that she was having this very complex seizure activity, which was, at that time, they didn't know what was causing it or what was identifying it. They were only working to stop it. And so that, as you may know, if you have anybody that's dealt with seizures, that usually means phenobarb, which is unfortunately just a mask for those seizures. It's not really addressing the problem. But we were able to take her home after about 10 days. We were able to actually go home. And that sort of began a journey for us of learning about this disorder, because the doctors literally told us, "You're going to have to join a Facebook group. You're going to have to find people online, because we have no experience. We don't know what this is. We don't know how to direct you as to what your next steps may be. And so we, as we worked through this process, one of the most hopeless or helpless feelings I've ever had was holding her as a very young baby and watching her have a seizure. It's the most hopeless I've ever felt at that time, at least. But long story short, we were very fortunate. We had the ability to identify her disorder very early. We have watched some families now that are diagnosing children that have been misdiagnosed for perhaps decades. Kids that are well into their teens or even in their 20s. At least we got an answer when she was not even a year old. We also were dealing with things like cortical visual impairment. Her eyes were perfect, but unfortunately, the seizure disorders would cause her brain to literally turn off her vision, and so she would not be able to track motion or see in 3 dimension. And so that was very, very difficult to deal with because obviously vision drives so much of a child's development. It makes them curious about the toys or things that are around them. And without the component of vision, it's a huge challenge. Just barely a week before her first birthday, she had a corrective eye surgery that was an absolute game changer. They took her and sedated her, which was again one of those things that's just so very, very just stressful. But they reattached the muscles at the back of her eyes and actually changed her field of vision, which in a matter of 48 hours dramatically changed her life. The pictures before and after are almost staggering in how different that she looks. When her vision specialist came to the house the first time after her surgery, Hazel literally sat up and watched Tracy walk in the house and watched her walk around the couch. And she had never done that before. And Tracy was almost in tears. And I asked her, I said, how many children have you seen that have had a result like this? Because what we saw in a very short period of time was life-changing. And she thought for a moment. And then she said, I can think of 2, Hazel and one other, that had such a dramatic change within their vision. But we fought through all these things, whether it was, even something as simple as, well, it should be simple, of a wheelchair for her or a gait trainer for her to help her learn to walk, because that was such a process. PT, OT, speech were a full-time job. Megan, my wife, was as a mom, basically assumed that role, and it was a full-time job for her to help Hazel, because we were so fortunate. Again, we were so lucky that we had a team of people that were so dedicated and so caring and so just lovely people. And we were lucky that we had those people, because the advancements that Hazel was able to make in that time were amazing. And we were documenting those things through a Facebook page called Hazel on the Move. And if anybody wants to see that, her progress and things she was doing were just astounding. And in this STX community, you hear a lot of people talk about, we talk about children's milestones or even our milestones as adults. And you hear about, in this group, you hear about inch stones and these little things that as parents, you may try to compare your children to others. And it was very hard. It was very hard to understand that her advancement and her growth was not going to be like anybody else, that it would be unique and that she would walk her own path. But it was so amazing because that little kid, she just never gave up. She was such a stubborn, almost ornery sometimes. She was nonverbal and classified as non-mobile, but that certainly doesn't mean that she wasn't, going to make noise and tell you what she thought of something, or certainly didn't mean as she had gotten older that she wasn't moving at a really fast pace around our living room, although she just simply wasn't walking yet. And it was something that I was really astounded by almost on a weekly basis, the advancement that she was making. And unfortunately, long story short, July 16th of 2021, which was a Friday, it was a beautiful day. I was traveling for work in Portland, Oregon. I got a phone call from my wife at about 1:30 in the afternoon, and answered the phone as I was standing in a store that I work with regularly. And I jokingly answered the phone and said, well, what's wrong? Because she knew I would be busy. It's a busy Friday. And it was a brigade captain from the local fire department here in Washington State. And basically, I could hear just absolute chaos and just utter chaos in the background. And he said the brigade captain told me that Hazel had gotten a foreign object into her throat or into her airway, and that she had stopped breathing, and that when they found her, that she didn't have a heartbeat. My wife had been performing CPR until they arrived. My neighbors told me later that the response and the speed and the urgency of everybody that came to this cul-de-sac was astounding. They said the response was really quite something to watch. And I asked him, I tried to get a sense of what was happening, because I was 180 miles away. And he said, "You need to drive safely, but you need to get here now." And I did, but it took me a solid 4 hours. The first 13 miles of that trip took an hour because Portland traffic is hideous. And after a little more than 4 hours, I finally got back to Seattle, where she'd been transported to Seattle Children's, where she was. We'd spent so much time over the years. The 16th, that was the day of her accident, was a Friday. On Sunday, the 18th, they don't know, perhaps in her sleep, something happened, and basically she had a brain bleed, which they didn't know how long she was without oxygen, but they told us on Sunday that she was just simply not likely to survive. They asked us at that time if we would consider or had thought about organ donation, and at which time we told them absolutely, we didn't need to consult or think about that together. On the 20th of July, she had to pass 2 separate tests over the course of 12 hours, 9 o'clock in the morning and then 9 o'clock at night, to demonstrate that she was brain dead. And then on Thursday, the 22nd, they took her for her organ donation. They lined the hallways of the hospital. We had such careful and such caring people, and such grace that we were shown during our time there. But they lined the hallways and they blew bubbles over her and us as we walked to the OR. And then we said goodbye. What I'm trying to do now is to not just tell her story, and not just talk about losing her, but to talk about how she fought for so many things that we all take for granted every day. And I try very hard not to take those things for granted, because she fought for those things. And I'm also now, I'm trying so hard to talk about this to raise awareness around organ donation, because I was really unaware of how little, I shouldn't say how little, how rare it is. That it's just, there's the conditions that just have to be met, and there's just so many things that go into it. And so I really try to talk about it because Hazel's eyes, which is amazing, because for the first year of her life, she was functionally blind. Her cornea has restored sight to 2 different adults. Her kidneys went to 2 different adults, again, a woman in her 40s and a man in his 60s, that took them both off of dialysis, which I didn't know was even possible. Her liver went to a man named Shiguru, who lives in Salem, Oregon, who wrote us a letter that is both just beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. And he talked about how his life he was losing everything. He couldn't do the things, he couldn't cook or be with his family or do the things that he wanted to do. And then he said one day he got a phone call. And then now he was doing all those things. He was spending time with his family, and he had the energy and the ability to do those things. And her heart was the only thing that went to an actual child. I'd never expected to think that her organs would go to so many adults, which I just thought was so amazing. But her heart went to a little boy who they say was quiet. And, Hazel was nonverbal, not quiet per se, but nonverbal. They said the little boy likes to eat, and Hazel would eat almost anything. She was funny in that way. And they said that little boy likes to spend time with his dad. And when I heard that, I knew that little boy was going to be okay. And so I miss her every day. And I don't know what else to tell you guys. I know you know, and it's, what I found is that the more I talk about this, the more I find people that have been through the same thing. And it is really astounding to me how many people I have run into just seemingly by accident. And you just happen to start talking to people, and it's amazing how many stories I've heard and people that have endured this type of loss, which is just I've learned that it just this ache in my heart doesn't stop. And while sometimes I look like a functioning human being because I have to, in so many ways I feel like an actor on a stage sometimes, because in reality my heart just aches so badly all the time. And it's only those little moments where sometimes I travel for work. I just got back from Germany this week, just 2 days ago. And sometimes I can sort of set reality aside. I can sort of pretend while I'm somewhere that's not my home, and then coming home, while I want to be nowhere but home, it really does bring, it brings so much back. And it just, and I don't want to lose that, but man, it hurts every day.
Yeah. Christian, first off, from the bottom of my heart and Dan's heart, we're sorry you had to join this horrible club. Like you said, you never really realize how many people have gone through it until it happens to you, and then you just start meeting people everywhere coming out of the woodworks that have gone through such similar ordeals. Sounds like Hazel was quite the fighter, never gave up. And yeah, I'm curious how you did that 4-hour drive, because you know what? When I heard you say you had to do that, I don't know how you did it, to be honest. I think it shows how strong you are. Not that you had a choice, obviously, but how was that 4-hour drive?
It's one of the toughest things about this is, one, I travel not just by plane, but I travel by car. So I have to be in a car, and I've definitely had horrific flashbacks, and it's let's be honest, it's post traumatic stress. What was tough, I was at the time driving a very, very nice electric vehicle. So not only did it take, really quite a long time. I had to stop and charge this thing about halfway, a little bit more than halfway. Otherwise, I couldn't have made it all the way up into Seattle. But to be completely honest, Chris, I've made that drive to Portland, I don't know, 100. I mean, I've lived in Seattle 27 years. I've driven back and forth to Portland over 100 times. I mean, plenty of times. I don't remember the majority of that trip. It was, and being stuck, especially in that type of traffic where there's literally, no exaggeration, wall to wall, and there's no escape. There's no way you can get out, and you can do nothing except sit there. And I'm sobbing and crying in a way that's my ribs, are beginning to actually physically hurt. And I can only imagine like what people near me or around me must have seen or thought. But I said earlier, that was a time when I had never felt so hopeless, and that was the time when I felt the most hopeless, because there was nothing I could do. I couldn't. I would have driven down the shoulder if I could, and there's literally no shoulder to even drive down. I would have broken the law to do that, and I literally could go nowhere, and I couldn't call Megan. I couldn't. There was nobody I could. I guess I did receive, like, I'm thankful that my best friends actually live really close to the Seattle Children's, and they actually beat the ambulance and Megan. They beat them there. So I was hopeful, or thankful at least, that I knew that she would have somebody around her, and somebody that was there for her. But this sense of helplessness, and this sense of, and I guess I hate to say it, I had this feeling in my heart where I just knew that she was gone, and I knew I wasn't going to see her again. And I'd already been gone for 2 days. I left on a Wednesday. I make these, kind of 72-hour trips. And I just had this feeling that I just wasn't going to see her alive again. And it just broke my heart. It just broke my heart. And I've seen some things. I've been through some things in my life. I've seen things I'd like to, forget. But I would say that 4 hours was easily the hardest and most traumatic 4 hours of my life. I don't think I've ever felt so alone and so helpless at the same time. So, yeah, it was. Like I said, I literally cannot drive that stretch of road. I go out through I take a very long remote way out of Portland when I leave now. It's actually a prettier drive anyway, but I simply cannot drive down that road. I just can't do it. So, yeah.
So, Christian,
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, it's. Go ahead, Dan.
So, Christian, yeah, along that, can you talk about guilt? Do you have guilt about not being home? Did you have guilt? And if so, how did you work through that? Are you still working through it, or are you guilt free at least because you know there was nothing you could do?
I don't feel guilty about being away because that was what's allowed us to provide. Like the house we live in, the house we found is all on one floor. It's almost 2,000 square feet of being on one floor, and it's beautiful. It's up against the woods. We have a huge backyard. And so being away and traveling is what's allowed me to provide that for my family. And, that's why I say, like, when I'm home, I do everything I can to be home and to be here, to be with them. Now, this is going to sound not crazy, but this is going to maybe mess you up a little bit. At least it messes me up a little bit. So Hazel, being non-mobile, had a wheelchair. And oftentimes, though, I would carry her. And she was getting quite big. She was getting really big. But if we were just going to a restaurant, if we were going inside someplace or going someplace where I know I could just, if we're going to our favorite Mexican place and I knew I could just carry her in, I'm not taking the wheelchair in. I'm gonna throw her over my shoulder, sit her down in the booth, and she would sit up to the table. She was, completely, stable in that way. The guilt that I have is that my elbow doesn't hurt anymore. My shoulder doesn't hurt. I had tendonitis in my right elbow, and I'll be 47 this year. My guilt is that when I wake up, my elbow doesn't hurt, my shoulder doesn't hurt, and I would trade that. I would trade that to have her back. I would have my elbow hurt me every day for the rest of my life, and it sounds so weird, like, but that's what I feel. That's what I feel guilty about, is that my shoulder doesn't, and like I look around my office and I've got the straps for a tennis elbow and all these things that I don't have to use anymore, and I would trade that. I would trade any of that for even just a day. I couldn't find any Kleenex, so I got yellow microfiber towels. That's all I got. So,
you use what you need to, brother.
Yeah. So, and that's, I know it's a weird thing to feel guilty about, but man, I would trade anything just to see her. So,
I think anybody that's listened to our show, every person that's been on here has shared something that it's the weirdest things. Chris and I we certainly can relate in the crazy weird things that shouldn't matter, but they do. Yeah, they're the things that trigger us. They're the things that we feel guilty about. It's just one of the infinite pieces of grief that just make it so difficult to go on that journey, man.
It is so tough. And flying home, I just flew home from Munich 2 days ago. Um, I happened to be seated next to a man. He was one of the last people to board. Long story short, turns out we have more things in common than you could possibly imagine. But he was one day past the 1 year anniversary of losing his best friend. He was a young man in his 40s, dropped dead and had a heart attack. He was barely 18 months out from losing his brother-in-law and his father. He lost all these things he lost all these people that were so very close to him. And we were on this plane home from Denver for 2.5 hours, and we didn't stop talking for that entire time. And he must have said it 2 or 3, maybe 4 times, that he was like, hey, it's nothing like what you've been through. And I just wish people would approach grief from a standpoint where it's just not a competition. You're going to go through grief and loss. And for him, the way he was telling me about these 3 people that he's lost, I was like, I mean, losing a child is just probably the most horrific thing I can imagine, but I can't imagine the ache or the hurt in his heart. And so, if there was anything I would tell people about grief is it's not a competition, and we're all going to go through these things differently. But, as we talk about them or as we discuss these things, I think that's what brings me at least some understanding. It'll never bring me closure, I don't think, but it's understanding that people are going to endure these things as part of the human condition, that we all go through these things. And I wish that we could understand that there's no scoreboard. There's no scoreboard in this. And that your grief, whether it's a father or a mother or a pet, I mean, all of those things are going to affect us all, and they're going to affect us, deeply. And so and again, that's another reason why I still keep trying to talk about this, because we all are going to endure things like this. We all experience things like this throughout our life. And as you get a little older, unfortunately, it's happened to me now where you hear somebody say, did you hear about Paul? And Paul didn't buy a boat. Paul's not on vacation, right? Like, Paul died. And you reach an age where you go through these things. And, I've lost friends to horrific cancers, and I've lost friends to all these things. And it's just, it is unfortunate, but it is just part of being a human being.
Yeah, it is for sure. And I think, like you said, the comparison, we've actually had I don't know if we've had a full episode on that, Dan, but I know we've talked about comparing, loss in different ways, and how at the end, if we really just kind of all work together and support each other instead of worried about the comparison, it makes such a big difference helping each other out in the long run. And yeah, man, I mean, coming on and telling us the story of Hazel is such a big deal. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about, what your goal is now. What are you wanting now to help keep Hazel's memory alive going forward?
Yeah, so definitely the biggest. There's 2 components to that. Number one is with a rare disorder like STX. It's understanding that there's a lot of people that are out in the world that are dealing with these things that are almost, I don't want to say unheard of, but we have a neighbor. God, I mean, I'm so happy that they're so close to us. But their son has a disorder. It's only been identified in, I believe, 2 or 3 people in the world. And so I tell you that because what I have found is that so much in society we talk about inclusion. Inclusion has been this big buzzword. But so often I have seen these children, and again, as teenagers or people perhaps are a little older, one of the things you hear the most from parents that are dealing with these things is that they don't feel included. Or if their child is out at dinner and their child is perhaps loud or yelling or whatever they may be going through, that they, the side eyes and the dirty looks and people don't understand. People do not understand what these families endure on a 24-hour basis, that there is no break, there is no vacation. It can consume you, right? It can consume you. And none of us ever expected that. We never expected to be in a position where we had a child that was one of 300 people in the world that had ever been identified. And she was only identified because they sequenced their entire human genome, right? Like down every line of DNA had to be coded to figure out what's going on. And so there's two things I really try to bring awareness to or to talk about. And number one is that inclusion is not a buzzword. That if you want to actually include people, you need to listen to them and listen to their stories and listen to what they've been through. Because more often than not, they're probably not talking about it. Some of these families I've met are just some of the strongest people. They're never going to tell you about it. They're just going to do the work. They're going to put in the effort to care for their family and do what they have to do. When Hazel was probably 3, one of my good friends came over to the house for a birthday party, and I've known him 20 years. And he said something to the effect of, and it was like a Cinco de Mayo party. It's a beautiful day. We're on the back patio. And he said something to the effect of, he goes, I don't know how you do it. And I was like, well, what do you mean? He goes, I've never seen you complain. I've never seen you whine. I've never seen you, come to work. You're always doing what has to be done. I've never seen you stop. I've never seen you complain. And I said, well, I mean, you don't really have a choice, right? Like, I don't have a choice. I can't just stop. I can't just roll over. I'm not going to do that. It's not in my nature anyway. But I can't just stop because I have to take care of Addison. I have to take care of Megan. I have commitments to people that I care about deeply. And so, talk to people that tell you that they're okay, because they're probably not okay. And I know for men, at least, of my age and generation, we were never taught to deal with these things or talk about these things. I came from walk it off and rub some dirt on it. I went to an all boys school, for God's sakes. You were not taught to deal with these things or how, and I frankly didn't have too many positive role models, male role models when I was young. Because my dad wasn't around. He wasn't in the picture. And I didn't learn how to cope with these things or good coping skills or how to deal with them. I didn't learn any of that until I was way older in life. But I would say, number one, you gotta talk to people. You gotta ask, and when they're trying to tell you a story or they're trying to tell you what they're dealing with, don't try to relate it to something else. Don't try to relate it to what you've been through. Just let them talk, right? Let them get it out. I see that so often. I remember telling somebody about Hazel's disorder once, and then this woman said something to the effect of, oh yeah, my cousin's daughter has Down syndrome. And I was like, that's not what we're talking about. I mean, like, I appreciate you're trying to bring some sort of relation. You're trying to relate to this, but that's not, it sounds dismissive. Right? So listen to people and then include them and listen to what they've told you so that you can understand what they need to feel included, for God's sakes. It's just one of those things that I think is just, it frustrates me to really no end. And then number two is with organ donation. I did some speaking work with the Washington State Fathers Network here in Washington, trying to bring some awareness. We were interviewed by local news that was trying to do a mirror piece to a young boy that was at Seattle Children's. They were looking for a living donor, I believe, for his liver. And they wanted to interview a family that had the opposite side, where a family had donated organs from a child. And literally within, they called on a Monday night at 5:00, and they were here within 90 minutes to interview us for a piece that aired a few times here in Seattle. What I've been trying to do is tell this story and understand that, Hazel is not here. I will never hold her again, but I am hopeful that one day I will hear her heartbeat in that little boy's chest, if they'll let me. I want to go to Salem and meet Shiguru, because if I read his letter, it is both beautiful and heart-wrenching at the same time. But it is something that his gratefulness and the honor and the care in which he is very much, obviously, he has taken his life very seriously, and he does not take that for granted. He doesn't take it very lightly. And the weight and the feel of that letter is something that it kind of brings me comfort in knowing, again, that Hazel is still changing the world. Right, this little girl who was only with us for a very short period of time, never said a word to me, never said a single word to me, but she told me so much. Right, and no person in my life has ever affected me or changed, my outlook or how I approach the world, how I think about the world. Um, and I only had her for 6.5 years, right? I had her for just a very, very short period of time. And um, with organ donation, it's amazing to me that her life will change so many others. What if that little boy goes on to have children of his own? And what if that little boy goes on to have children of his own that maybe finds out how to beat genetic disorders like this? Or, the butterfly effect can have such positive things too. And it is, again, it's one of the only things that has brought me like comfort or peace. Um, when so Life Center Northwest is our organization here in this area that does all the organ donation coordination in this area, and they had a event at the Bellevue Hyatt back on July 31st, and the CEO of Life Center Northwest, a doctor, told Hazel's story as the very opener for this event. Obviously, with our permission, they asked and said, and he had only started just a couple months prior to this happening to our family. And he said it was something that affected him very deeply, and that he'd had a picture of Hazel on his wall next to his desk for that entire time. And he got up and he told the story. He told her entire story to a room of 300 people or more in this giant ballroom. And so keeping her story alive and keeping her name alive, with the goal, though, of helping others understand that, I have a good friend that donated a kidney to a stranger because they were a match. And I have such admiration for him for that, because it's just such a selfless thing. But knowing that if I wasn't here and if I could help others, and if I could save somebody's father or mom or anybody, that I would do that. That this vessel that I'm in right now is, if I'm not here, that if it could help other people, then I want it to help other people, and that it's something that can touch so many lives. And what was amazing, my last leg of this trip, coming home from Germany this week, I was again seated next to a man who had just lost his best friend and his brother-in-law within the last 18 months, and they donated organs from his brother-in-law. And this man that was sitting next to me in this random flight from Denver to Seattle was in that room. He was in the room at the Hyatt. He was there at that event from Life Center Northwest. I never met him. I don't remember seeing him. There's a lot of people there. And we were talking about this, and he told me that, I told him about Hazel. He told me about Nathan. And I said, were you at the event in July? And he said, my wife and I couldn't stop crying. And I was like, and he said that from the opening story, I was like, that was my daughter. And it was just such a random, strange moment. It was just such an interesting thing, which happens to me a lot. If I talk about this, if I tell this story, it's amazing to me, these things that keep happening. As long as I speak up, as long as I talk about it, not talking about it doesn't help, and it doesn't help at all. But I'm amazed that when I do talk about it, how often I hear these things that I've told the story before, where somebody maybe seen us on the news before, or they'd heard the story, or we're trying to raise money through for Seattle Children still, and it's amazing when I talk about it. I hear people tell a very similar story. So it helps. It helps.
Your man, your story is inspiring in so many different ways.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I'm having a hard time tonight because organ donation, that's the one, other than obviously just the fact that Jameson passed, and being mad about that. Organ donation is the one thing that I'm mad about during the event, because we decided right away, Eric and I decided right away that we wanted to have his organs donated. And we cut our time short in the hospital room with him after he had already been pronounced dead, because we knew they needed to go take care of the body and save his organs. So we gave up time saying goodbye to him that day, expecting that he was going to have his organs harvested. And for whatever reason, they weren't. He was the autopsy is about 2.5 to 3 hours away, because we're in a small town in the western North Carolina mountains, and for whatever reason, they couldn't or didn't have a refrigerated car, and so his and maybe my dream of the impact his organs could have made. Maybe my dream is bigger than what reality would have been. I don't know. But man, I would love to have those stories that you have, that they don't fix anything, and yeah, you wish you had Hallie, and we wish we had Mason and Jameson back, but yeah, if they're not here, the impact that your little girl is having on so many other lives, dang, that's
I'm so
beautiful.
sorry that you had to go through that, but I would tell you that the selflessness and the fact that you were willing to give up that time and the sacrifice that you made isn't lost.
Yeah.
It is a shame that they didn't, or and I would assume it's because they couldn't. I would assume it's not because they didn't want to. That it's because they couldn't.
Yeah.
But I would tell you that to make that decision in that moment, and the selflessness and I know that in your heart that the goal was just to simply help others, even if that meant losing Jameson and losing him sooner. That act, nobody can take that from you. That's something that you should honor and be proud of, because it's just, I can't think of anything that is more selfless in that moment. And it's horrific to be made to make that decision for your child. But I think the decision itself has such honor to it, just to make the decision alone. I would say thank you, even just for trying, and knowing that you were willing to do that. Nobody can take that from you.
Yeah.
You know, it's something that we should all be proud of.
Yeah.
And again, and just by talking about it, maybe changing the narrative or changing the understanding of what that looks like, or what, gosh, I mean, even the resources or things that hospitals may not have access to. What if we start telling more stories to help them gain these things, to help more people? It's just, but God, I can only imagine, Dan. I can only imagine how badly that hurts.
Yeah. Well, and I appreciate so much the things you're saying, because again, I think your words are going to have such a great impact on so many people listening. The organ donation piece is obviously huge, but you talked a lot about too, of just letting people talk, and the man on the plane, and look at that connection that you two had. But and that's why Chris and I do this show, is just so we can talk to each other and heal. And if we can get other people to come on with us and give them that floor to just to talk,
yeah,
it helps. And then
absolutely,
if we can, and I think I think the words "change the narrative" is a good way to put it. As society, if we can change the narrative and get people to listen,
yep.
What an impact. So I think your words tonight are beautiful and so impactful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot.
Yeah, and I wanted to throw out there too that kind of like you were saying, Christian, like the resources. Like, I agree. I've heard that story from Dan numerous times now. No reason their family should have had to go through that and lost that time. Bringing that awareness to, medical organizations, hospitals, whatever, making sure they have the resources. Because think of how many people that, Jameson could have helped and just nonsense for not having the resources in place in the greatest country in the world with the greatest medical in the world. I don't understand why we're even having this issue, you know. So
it should realistically never
us
happen.
talking of exactly. So us talking about it and getting that info out there, and you know, maybe people, if you're listening, you need to check with your local medical organization and see, hey, how does organ transplant work in my medical organization? If something were to happen to me or my loved ones, what is your game plan to make sure that the people that I am donating my organs to, how are you going to get them out there? How is it going to work? And maybe that's just where we need to even just start the conversation, just to make sure that this doesn't happen to other people as well.
Absolutely. Just the awareness alone. I mean, just yeah, Dan. I'm just sitting here thinking. I'm just so sorry that you went through that. I know that we had so little time with Hazel in that window, and I can't imagine having lost or losing that time or having less time. I'm so sorry you went through that.
Yeah, and I don't want to like shift the focus away from Hallie tonight, but it's just I resonate with your story. Breaks my heart because
yeah,
every one of these stories that Chris and I hear breaks our heart, but each one we're in this club together. That there's so many pieces of all these stories that we're so well connected on for the rest of our lives. And
well, you know, I'll tell you, it was wild. So you know, she was pronounced on a Tuesday, and on Wednesday, they said that they would be spending the time coordinating organs, and that the heart would be the most critical piece. And I went back alone by myself on Wednesday, and I shouldn't have gone by myself. But everybody we'd been there for a few days, and it was kind of wearing on everybody. And we knew that we were going to be back soon to say goodbye. And I went to spend the day, and I thought we were going to, you know, listen to music or watch movies in bed. And it broke my heart because I couldn't do it. And I ended up spending a couple of hours in the Family Resource Center, and they let me print these beautiful color pictures that I then took back to the room, and her nurse Kathleen put them all on the outside of her door, this glass sliding door, and she just put up just this beautiful spread of photos for us. And I stayed for a couple hours, but I just, after being there by myself, it just was really wearing on me. And I hadn't eaten in days. I didn't know barely what day it was, and I went home. I was driving home by myself, and I just knew that I needed food. And I knew if I went home, I wasn't going to cook. I wasn't going to make food. And so I went someplace that really had brought me comfort for many years, a restaurant here in Seattle called Cactus, which I've loved for many, many years. And I stopped at, probably 3:30 in the afternoon, so in between lunch and dinner. And I probably looked a mess walking in that restaurant. And I got seated. I realized I forgot my wallet. I had to go walk out back to the car. Then came back in. Then I realized that I couldn't listen to the music they were listening to. So I had to go back and get my AirPods because I was getting anxious sitting there. But I knew I had to eat. And the waitress, she knew right away that something was wrong. And after I ordered a margarita and an appetizer because I was just so hungry, she came and she kind of sat down because she knew something was wrong. And she goes, "Are you okay?" I said, "No." I said, "My daughter died." And as I was sitting there at this table, this was right before she sat down, Life Center Northwest, our coordination team called and told us that they were going to be taking her the following day on Thursday at about 4:00. And I had to take this phone call in this restaurant. There's plenty of people in there. I certainly was not by myself, but I certainly felt very vulnerable. And that's when she came and sat down and she asked me, what was going on. I told her, explained it to her, and next thing is, she's tearing up, and I'm not doing well. To the point where she forgot to order my lunch. She literally, I was sitting there eating my guac, and she comes back. She goes, "Do you not want lunch?" I was like, "No, I ordered lunch. Did you not order my lunch? Because I'm hungry." And she, so, "Ay, Dios mío." She, forgot to order my lunch. She goes, runs to order lunch, and I'm on my third margarita by now, and I've racked up a $75 lunch tab by this point, and it was time for me to flee. Right, it was time for me to go. I needed to go home and sort of face reality. And I asked her for the check, and she comes and she sits down next to me, and she goes, I have the receipt for lunch like in my dresser drawer. And she comes, she sits down, she goes, "You came here for comfort, you no pay." And I was like, "Oh gosh." I'm like, now I'm bawling as I'm trying to basically run out of this restaurant. I'm trying to throw any cash that I have loose in my wallet. I'm trying to throw on the table as she's trying to not let me. But I just remember her kindness, and I remember in that moment how much I needed kindness, and I needed grace, and I needed help, and I needed lunch because I hadn't had lunch in 5 days. And I have been fortunate that I've met so many of those people when I travel or just locally, and I've met so many people that have been so kind and so gracious, and you are reminded that there are really good people out there that do care, and they do see when somebody, even if it's a stranger, they see when that person is struggling or suffering. And she was just so kind, and she was just so nice, and she had told me as we were saying that she'd remembered me, that I had been in the bar for happy hour with a coworker, I mean maybe a couple months prior, and she said that she remembered me and how nice we were, and it was just again, it was one of those humbling things where I was very much not even a functioning human being at this point, and she recognized that, and she saw exactly what I was dealing with, and she knew that I was not doing well, and I will never forget her kindness in that moment, and then it will mean a lot to me for a long, long time.
I don't think there's many things in this world today that are easier than just providing a listening ear. With everything going on in society, it's free and it's easy, and but it makes a huge impact.
You don't realize how quickly you can change somebody's day, or even just their outlook, even if it's a short period of time, by just understanding and just by listening. And I think we all know in this day and age, sometimes you feel like you're interacting with people and they're just waiting for their turn to talk, and that's okay. I get it. We're all, this sense of anxiousness that's being pumped into us by staring at 3 screens all day long. I get it. You know, but we have to take a step back, and we need to look people in the eye and see them, right, and see what they're going through, and let them talk, let them share their story. I mean, this fellow on the plane, Brad and I yesterday. I mean, we came to a point that we had to turn the lights off for a second so we could supposed to sit there and cry pretty openly. We were running out of cocktail napkins underneath the rum and cokes. And we had to turn the lights off because we both were like, okay, I'm going to sit here and cry for a minute. And it was in that moment. It was just such an odd and surreal thing, right? To know that that we've been in the same places, we've dealt with the same people, the same issues, and that his daughter, they'd been through so much with his youngest, and they had been through Seattle Children's because she also had a seizure disorder. So I was sharing with him like what we found helped Hazel, and that there were other things that they could look at or try. And we would never have known that, right? We would have never known that if we hadn't. I mean, I all the time, I just plug my headphones in sometimes and just, I don't want to talk to people on the plane. And then you find out, you go through some of these things and you realize, like, I got to look at these people in the eye and I got to talk to them, and you'll be amazed at what you hear. I mean, the stories that you hear are just, it's amazing. It's might be heartbreaking. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy to hear. And what I've certainly found with Hazel, for my German colleagues, and not just my German colleagues, I'm saying most recently my German colleagues, when I tell this story, or even just a little tiny bit of the story, because I couldn't tell much of it while I was abroad, it hurts my friends that are good dads the best, or even, let's be honest, even strangers. And it hurts the most to people that understand, and that you can't fathom, you can't imagine going through something like that. And that's been one of the toughest things is watching, some of my friends. You can see how much it hurts them, and it hurts like to talk about it. but you gotta talk about it, right? You cannot bottle these things up, because that is basically the same as ignoring it, and that's not going to fix anything. That's not going to help anybody, right? Like you can't just ignore it. You gotta talk about it. You got to deal with it.
Well, Christian, I think you bring up one of the things Dan and I preach all the time. That's why we definitely want as many dads or anybody going through grief that wants to come on our show and just have that time to speak their mind and get their story out. And I think it's great to, like you were saying, it sounds like Hazel was an amazing daughter, and to be able to get, who she was out there to everyone is the most important. That's my favorite part overall is, learning who they are and what they were as people. So,
and I don't know if you had a chance to see her webpage, or if you had a chance to see, but I don't think I can flip this camera around, but yeah, I was gonna try to show you a picture, but that's okay.
Well, why don't you throw her? What is her website, or her organization that people can look up if they want to see it?
So the two fastest ways to find things about Hazel's story on Facebook is just at our public page, which is called Hazel on the Move, which was really started years ago. It was really started to show what her journey through her physical therapy, PT, OT, speech, and the advancements that she was making. It was something that we did to help other families see that there was hope, or that there was that all the work and the hard and long days would really lead to such amazing changes, and that while it seemed sometimes so difficult, that there was opportunity and optimism and hope with that. So on Facebook, Hazel on the Move. And then one of the things I really I'm happy that is up is at Life Center Northwest, so lcnw.org. And her story is under their blog posts. They tell stories of both organ recipients and organ donors. And so if you click on blog under their page and just type in Hazel, just Hazel, just Hazel, it'll pop right up. It was about 18 months ago, but it's in the top 10 or 12 within their blog entries. And I love that because it really, they do a good job, I think, of telling her story. There's some good pictures of the whole family there. And I think they did a really good job. So.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing all that.
You're welcome. I really appreciate what you guys do, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And I think it is helpful. It's helpful just to know that not just you guys are doing just great work, but how many people really understand what we're all going through. So I appreciate it. I really do.
Yeah, you said something right at the very beginning tonight of just we take things for granted, and it amazes me how aware I am of death now that Jameson has passed. Of God, the number of people, but especially the number of children that pass away daily. It just, and yeah, we take it for granted that nothing can possibly happen to us. So make the most of the moments that we have.
Absolutely. Life is unfortunately not just difficult and sometimes painful, but it is just so awfully short. And she had to fight and fight and fight. And I've been so lucky throughout my life. And I just try not to take that for granted. I try not to forget, that man, you don't have long, and you have to take advantage of the time that you have, and you have to be conscious of the fact that, I mean, I like I said, I've lost so many friends to just crazy things, whether it was glioblastoma or liver cancer, and people in their 30s and early 40s, and that, like you said, Dan, that happens every day. I mean, that is happening every single day. Just on our floor at Seattle Children, while we were there, just on our one floor, there was 30 or 31 other families just on that one floor while we were present. And that's 24/7, 365. I mean, that does not stop. And so, I do struggle with that. You talk about, that guilt. Like, I can't get too close to Seattle Children's. Like, I can't barely even think about seeing that building because I know what people are enduring there. I've told friends because I never really understood it before, but like when you get within a few blocks of Seattle Children's, don't be surprised if you see some crazy guy driving on the shoulder or blowing through red lights. And I didn't understand it before. And then I understood it. I understood it very, very clearly. Like, oh, it's kind of dangerous. Like when that getting off the freeway and headed there, because those people are trying to get to their family. They're trying to get to their children. And you don't realize what people are going through in those moments. And it's happening every single day around us, every single day.
Well, Christian, I checked out those pages real quick. You got a beautiful daughter, and
Thank you.
we're so glad that you came on and shared her story and your story. And we're in this together now, man. You're always reach out to us, and we'll reach out to you for whatever you need throughout this whole process.
Oh, I really appreciate that. And I, as I'm sure you know, it's those weird dates, whether they're holidays like Christmas or her birthday coming up in February, coming up in March. And then, it'll be 2 years in July. And, it is tough. You have those dates that just seem to follow you around. And, it doesn't get easier. It doesn't get easier.
Right.
We get that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Christian, thank you so much for coming on and sharing. I hope your story helps. I know it's going to help a lot of guys because everybody can connect to pieces, and I hope it inspires more guys. As you said, we don't like to talk openly, but hopefully this will inspire more guys to get on here and just talk, because it does help. It's painful. It's hard. There will be tears, but
it hurts. It hurts, but
too. So
no, I really do appreciate it, and thank you for your continued work and the things that you've done. I know that it's helped more people than we could probably ever know.
Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate that.
So yeah, if we encourage everybody to check out lcnw.org and check out on Facebook Hazel on the Move. Just check out the story of this beautiful little girl and the impact that she's had on the world. Big impact in a short time. And we just thank everybody who's listening, and we thank Christian for coming on and sharing. And with that, we will wrap up this episode of A Father's Love, Healing Through Heartache.